Morning.
Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour.
Afternoon. So good morning, everyone. This is Eric Singler.
Eric.
He's ready for day 2.
Et je crois que nous
So
sommes
for
enfin
those
prêts
who
pour
were
cette
not
deuxième
with us
journée. Si vous n'étiez pas
yesterday,
avec
my
nous
name is still
hier,
Eric Singler.
je m'appelle toujours Eric et je crois que je suis toujours Managing Director de la famille BVA et le CEO de BVA Nudge Consulting. Je m'appelle Ted Utoft, je suis Chief Growth Officer. Nous sommes ici simplement pour vous souhaiter la bienvenue. Ici, à Paris, nous avons eu 1500 visiteurs uniques hier. Nous savons que vous êtes là. Nos équipes techniques savent que vous êtes connectés de partout, de Colombie, Londres, Singapour et j'en passe. Nous voyons également les questions que vous nous envoyez. Donc, si vous étiez avec nous hier, eh bien, soyez les bienvenus à nouveau. Pour ceux qui sont ici pour la première journée, eh bien, un bienvenue tout court. Nous allons avoir Katie Milkman avec nous ce matin. Mais avant cela, une petite synthèse de cette journée. Nous avons 5 sessions aujourd'hui sur différents sujets. Nous allons évoquer... Alors, est-ce que j'ai ma petite zapette? J'ai ma petite zapette, elle est là. Nous allons démarrer avec une table ronde sur un sujet clé pour toutes les grandes entreprises aujourd'hui, l'expérience client. Nous allons avoir une session dédiée à la banque et à la finance et nous avons une session dédiée à la politique publique. Et puis, nous allons parler de 2 autres thèmes. Un premier thème qui est donc l'expérience client et puis un autre sujet dont on parlera de manière plus détaillée à la fin de la journée, comment mettre en place les sciences du comportement de manière réussie dans les entreprises. Alors, nous souhaitons également pouvoir interagir avec vous, que ces sessions soient véritablement interactives. Donc, n'hésitez pas à nous envoyer vos commentaires et vos questions. Si vous avez des problèmes techniques, n'hésitez pas, pardonnez-moi, à nous contacter. Vous avez toutes les informations à l'écran. Si vous avez des idées à partager, vous pouvez également vous rendre sur Twitter, #TheHumanAdvantage, et nous avons un questionnaire chez BVA. Nous adorons avoir les retours et vos émotions, entre guillemets. N'hésitez pas à partager avec nous pendant la journée ou après la journée. Nous avons, vous verrez, c'est extrêmement court à la fin de chaque session et je crois que nous avons tout dit. Voilà, profitez de cette journée The Human Advantage. Adrien est là également pour dessiner toute la journée. Vous aurez la possibilité à l'écran de voir un certain nombre de ces dessins. Ces dessins seront également disponibles si vous rejoignez la communauté des Human Advantage. C'est parti avec notre premier intervenant, j'ai nommé Katie Milkman.
Welcome everyone to the second day here at the Human Advantage. For this opening conversation, I am going to leave, as usual now, most of the questioning to my colleague Ted Utoft. But I do want, and I am delighted to introduce our key speaker, the very talented Katie Milkman. Katie is James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and the host of the popular behavioral podcast Choiceology that I like very much and that I highly recommend to our audience. She's also the co-founder and co-director of the Behavioral Change for Good initiative, which is a research center with the mission of advancing the science of lasting behavior change. And somehow, Katie also managed to compile and send out her newsletter, Milkman Delivers. And I think I have just received one this morning. Over the course of her career, Katie has advised dozens of organizations on how to spur positive change, including Google, the US Department of Defense, the American Red Cross, Walmart, and Morningstar. Her best-selling book, this one that I also highly recommend, How to Change the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be, was released on, I think, May 2021. Welcome, Cathy. Big thank you for being with us. We are really honored and excited to have you here with us to open day 2 of the Human Advantage Conference.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Eric.
It's good to see you, Katie. As Eric mentioned, you published a very successful book last year, How to Change the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And in this kind of day 2 at the Human Advantage, we'd like to speak to you about exactly this topic, which is at the heart of our conference, and really in the interest of our audience. As you know, people come to behavioral science for very practical business solutions or for very personally driven, changes they want to see. So my first question to you would be kind of 2. One is, why is it so difficult to change? And you mentioned kind of 7 human impulses that commonly sabotage our attempts to make those positive changes. So I guess the second part of my question would be, could you share with us a little bit more about these human impulses?
Yeah, absolutely. So change is hard for many reasons, and I should point not only to the internal barriers we face, but also the many external, whether we have the financial resources, the social network, whether or not we have the health that it takes to change. But what I focus on in my book and in my research is the fact that even if everything is lined up in your favor, we still face internal barriers to change. And they differ from situation to situation and from person to person. And figuring out what exactly it is that you're up against, so you can design a solution that's tailor-made to tackle that barrier, is really important. So some of the key barriers to change that I focus on in my research and in my book include just the challenge of motivating yourself to get started. That's a big one that we often overlook. I also talk about the challenge of temptation or self-control. We're often tempted by things that are not good for us in the long run, and that leads us to make impulsive choices that we later regret. The flip side of that, of course, is procrastination. We also tend to overlook forgetfulness. Just forgetting or not putting it at the very top of your to-do list and letting it slip and slide can be a major barrier, and people tend to underappreciate how important that is. Of course, if we don't believe in ourselves, if we don't have the confidence, that can prevent us from making successful change. So that comes up a lot, in particular in situations where women and minorities face stereotype threat. And so I think it's really important to cover. And another barrier is habits and inertia. If you are thinking about the human condition, one thing you'll recognize is we tend to be lazy. We tend to take the path of least resistance. And so that means that our habits and what's easy can stand in the way. And then finally, and this is bridging a little bit from the internal to the external, I think it's really important to think about conformity in our social environments and the fact that the people we choose to surround ourselves with can be a barrier or they can be a help to change. So those are the key topics that I have focused on and that I wrote my book to sort of address and try to break down. These are the big barriers. These are features of human nature that stand in our way when we're trying to achieve our goals. And they're systematic, they're predictable, and we actually know quite a lot about how to overcome each of those barriers. But if we don't think carefully about which ones we're up against in a given situation where you say want to get in shape or motivate employees to be more productive, or where you want to start taking your medications regularly or save more for retirement, you might choose the wrong set of tools from behavioral science that aren't actually well suited to the problem you face.
I can't relate to any of those impulses. I look as Eric, my boss, is watching me on camera. So Katie, we understand that adopting new behaviors is very challenging. And that's kind of, I think, what all of us applied behavioral scientists need to remind citizens and consumers and clients of all the time. Because of human nature, even when we desire to change, like you said, even if we know what that change is and we want to change it, getting over that is difficult. But thankfully, you suggest some powerful strategies or kind of levers to be more successful at changing for the better. I'd like you to start by sharing some of your solutions with what you call the kind of fresh start effect. Can you explain for our attendees about the fresh start?
Yeah, absolutely. The fresh start effect is one of my favorite topics that I've studied. It's research that's mostly with Hengchen Dai of UCLA. And what we discovered in our work is that there are moments in our lives when we are more open to the idea of making a change. We're more motivated to do so. And they tend to come about at fresh starts or new beginnings in our life. So instead of thinking about our lives as a continuum, it turns out that we actually think about time in a choppier way than that. We think about ourselves as if we are characters in a book and there are chapters. And those chapter breaks come about quite regularly. Some of them are really big chapter breaks. You can think about, the college years, the years you spent living in Paris, the years you spent working at Accenture, graduate school years. Those are all different chapters. But there are also smaller chapters. Every week is a chapter break. Every year is a chapter break. Coming back from a vacation can be a chapter break. Holidays can be chapter breaks. Birthdays can be chapter breaks. And at these chapter breaks, what we found in our research is that people have a sense that they've reached a new beginning. They're opening a new page. They feel like they have a clean slate, and this gives them a sense of dissociation. So why is it that these fresh start moments are so motivating? Well, one of the key things we found in our research is that they give us the sense that we have a clean slate and a new beginning, and they make us feel dissociated from who we were before that chapter break. So think about New Year's, which is probably the most famous fresh start. About 40% of people make New Year's resolutions. One of the things that happens then, that happens on all these other fresh start dates as well, is that you feel like on January 1, you're a new person. And all the failures you had in the previous year, in December, I tried to quit smoking, but I failed. I meant to go to the gym last year, but I never got around to it. You can say that was the old me, and this is the new me, and the new me will be different. So we see this with all of these different dates, and we've found in data set after data set that people are more naturally motivated to do things like go to the gym, set goals on popular goal setting website about everything from their health to their finances to their education at these fresh start dates, ranging from Mondays to the beginning of a new month, new week, which is Monday, to birthdays and holidays. So all these natural break points are really motivating. And I think it's incredibly exciting because it's an opportunity not only to recognize when are people most primed to take advantage naturally of goal setting opportunities, but it's also a time when we can nudge people towards better decision making and towards change. And we've shown that can be effective in our research too. We have one study where we randomly assigned people who weren't saving for retirement to be encouraged to begin saving, setting aside money for the future. And we invited them in some conditions to start saving on a future date that was arbitrary, a few months off. And in other conditions, we actually offered people the opportunity to start on the same arbitrary future date, but we labeled it. So we noted that date was your birthday or after the start of spring. And what's really amazing is that we saw when those dates in the future were labeled and associated with a fresh start, we see about 20 to 30% more savings in the following 8 months among the people in our experiment than when they're offered an identical opportunity to begin saving, but at a moment that doesn't have a label that makes them think this is a perfect moment and a perfect opportunity to change. So I'm really excited about the potential of the fresh start effect. And I should say it has some downsides too. It can be disruptive when you're doing really well to have a fresh start come along because it can jolt you out of that sense that you have a continuum and your habits are fixed and set. So it can be dangerous. But there's a lot of potential to harness fresh starts to make positive change.
So is it fair to say, Katie, better to use the fresh start effect when we're trying to initiate a new habit or behavior, but don't disrupt good kind of habitual, good routines, good rituals with a kind of confounding fresh start?
Exactly. And of course, sometimes you can't avoid them. They come about naturally. So one thing to think about is when you are on a roll and you have a vacation coming up or a holiday break or something else that's going to give you a sense of a discontinuity, can you actually prepare and plan in advance so that when you come back, you'll get right back on that horse and succeed? So we can both prepare for these disruptions when things are going well, and then we can try to harness them when we want to create a positive new change by thinking of them as as great opportunities to start that gym routine or, start mentoring that employee you've been meaning to spend more time with. Whatever the goal is that's important to you at the moment, you can look for the next fresh start as an opportune moment to begin.
Perfect. You suggest another solution against, especially around confirmation bias, that you call the spoonful of sugar. Could you detail this kind of Mary Poppins approach to help us adopt positive changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're facing a challenge, when we need to do something that will require willpower and self-control, whether it's exercising or studying hard for a class or avoiding distractions to turn in a report on time at work, is that we think I should just push through. I should just use my willpower to get this done in the most efficient, effective way possible. And what research by Ayelet Fishbach at the University of Chicago and Caitlin Woolley at Cornell has shown is that actually we do better if we think about ways to pursue goals that are fun rather than thinking about ways that are effective, which is really counterintuitive. So, for example, when people are encouraged to try to build a workout routine or try to get to the gym and to do an exercise that they'll enjoy, they end up persisting longer than if they're encouraged to try to do an effective workout. And if you think about why that might be the case, what's going on is that people actually enjoy it when they say go to a Zumba class with a friend and they decide they'll keep coming back. But if they get on the most efficient exercise machine and just grind it out, it can be misery. The experience is so negative that they don't return. If we can make it actually fun to do the things that are good for us, we no longer have a self-control dilemma that we're facing at all. So I call this the Mary Poppins effect, spoonful of sugar. And there are a lot of ways to solve it. One is by selecting different ways of pursuing your goals. I just gave an example, right? The Zumba class with a friend, which may be a little less effective, but is enjoyable. You could think about studying with music in the background in a nice environment as opposed to in an unpleasant place. But another way to do this is through something I call temptation bundling, which is deliberately linking something that you love and crave and look forward to with whatever chore it is you know you're going to need willpower to get yourself to do. So if we're thinking about exercise, my classic temptation bundle would be only allow yourself to binge watch your favorite TV show while you're working out at the gym. Suddenly you look forward to those workouts and it makes the time fly by while you're on the treadmill and you waste less time binge watching that show. You can bundle other things though too, right? Favorite podcast with your household chores or opening a favorite bottle of wine only when you're cooking a fresh meal for your family. There are lots of ways to temptation bundle. But basically the principle behind all of this is the same, that we need to think about ways to make it fun to do whatever it is that we dread so that we stop dreading it. And you're no longer facing that temptation to avoid. Instead, you're actually tempted to begin.
Right. Another way to help us be successful at changing is to, in your words, handcuff ourselves. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah. So if you face this challenge, some sort of temptation that's standing in your way, there's really two approaches you can take. One is sort of the carrot approach, which I just mentioned. Well, how do we make it actually fun? So you lean in and look forward and impulsively desire that activity in the moment. The other approach, though, is the stick, which is how can you make it so punishing not to do it that you'll actually opt for what's in your long-term best interest. And the tool that research has looked at most, and that's been proven incredibly effective here for the stick approach, is what's called a commitment device. And that is literally penalizing yourself or obstructing yourself from avoiding doing what's in your long-term best interest. This sounds really weird, but we're very used to it in other contexts, right? If you think about managers, parents, governments, they're constantly setting up incentives and barriers to keep us from giving into our impulses. So think about speeding. You get fined if you do it, right? It might be tempting to speed, but you're worried you'll get a ticket. So there's this outsider that sees the temptation and sets things up. So it says, look, there's a penalty. Well, commitment device is exactly the same thing, but in this case, you actually do that fine or that barrier for yourself. You set your own penalty in case you make a mistake. So say you have a deadline at work you really don't want to miss. You know you might slip and not get around to it. You can literally put money on the line that you will have to forfeit if you fail to achieve that deadline, if you fail to hit that deadline. And you can use websites like stick.com or beeminder.com or a friend to set up these kinds of deals with yourself. And research shows that this type of commitment device where you penalize yourself for failing to achieve a goal can be incredibly effective. And actually, my favorite experiment showing how powerful this is a smoking cessation study that was done by Dean Carlin and collaborators, where people were given an opportunity to put money on the line that they would have to give up 6 months later if they failed a nicotine or cotinine urine test. And this group was, who was randomly assigned to have access to that commitment device to put money away, was compared with a control group that was just given standard smoking cessation tools. And what's amazing is that having access to this place where you can put money that you'll have to forfeit, you don't have to put any money, but you have an ability to do it, increased smoking cessation rates by 30%. So these things can be incredibly powerful. They're very counterintuitive because the idea of putting money on the line and fining myself sounds bizarre, but they're very, very powerful. So think about the carrot and the stick if you face a self-control dilemma and figure out which is likely to work better for you.
And do you have a sense, Katie, that there's certain, obviously it's on an individual by individual basis, but across the research you've done and the research that you've read, do you find there are certain scenarios or certain behaviors that seem to be better guided with the carrot and those that seem better with the stick?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think not everything is conducive to making fun. So let me give you an example, right? Schoolwork, deadlines, as I mentioned earlier, those things can be, you can make them a little bit better. And actually there's some nice research by Ayelet Fishbach showing that if you give kids snacks and play music and give them colored markers to do their math problem sets, they make more progress. But it's a little harder to make that fun than maybe a workout. So if there's something that it's challenging to temptation bundle or to bring joy into the activity itself, then I think those are really good candidates for considering a commitment device. And you can always layer both commitment devices and the Mary Poppins approach on top of one another for maximal benefit. But I do think thinking about how easy will it be to actually make it enticing to engage in this activity. And if you can't think of a good way to do that, which is going to be the case in certain situations, like I don't know how to make it enticing to quit smoking, for instance, but maybe you do. Right. If you can't think of a way to make it fun, then a commitment device is likely a handy tool and might be the right thing to consider.
Great. There's a very simple barrier to change, which is just progressively forgetting our intention, as you mentioned when we opened earlier. So we just simply flake out, right? So a solution that you suggest is about timely reminders or cue-based plans. Can you help us think about how we might apply this?
Yeah, absolutely. The first is very intuitive, and I think most of us now use digital devices to track our calendars and to make sure that we're getting a 15-minute warning before it's time to have an important meeting and so on, right? We know that we couldn't live without those kinds of tools for the most part. One really interesting study shows just how important it is that reminders, if you want to prompt somebody to engage in activity, need to be timely, though. And I think we underappreciate how important it is to let someone know right at the moment when they can take action what they ought to be doing if we want to help them follow through, and forgetting could be a barrier, whether it's medication adherence or buckling a seatbelt. This study involved prompting people to buckle up after they'd valet parked their car. And some people got a reminder right when they handed their keys to a valet who was going to run off and bring their car back. So about 5 minutes before they could buckle their seatbelt. And others got that reminder to buckle up literally as they were stepping into their car. So very small difference in time, but dramatic difference in result. Essentially, no benefit was seen from reminders that came a mere 5 minutes before people could take action, whereas an enormous benefit, about a 30 percentage point increase in buckling up was observed when people are reminded right when they can do it. So I do think an important part of reminders that we sometimes forget is how critical it is that we can literally take action the moment we receive that reminder. So reminders are great, but sometimes we can't remind ourselves. Sometimes we don't even know when we need to know to do the thing. You're not sure when you'll next be walking by the pharmacy and able to pick up whatever it is you need. And in those cases, actually, it can be really helpful to prompt people to make a plan. And so there's wonderful research by Peter Gollwitzer of NYU that's shown how important it is for us to actually form concrete implementation intentions when making a plan. So instead of just saying, I plan to exercise, or I plan to finish this report, or I plan to start saving for retirement, if you think through when will you do it, where will you do it, and how will you get there, you get a lot better results. And that's in part because that concrete planning helps you avoid forgetting, and it can serve as a type of commitment device because you're committing to yourself and now you feel like you'd be backing out on your best intentions and if you don't follow through. And one of my favorite studies on this looks at voting, just asking people, when will you vote, where will you vote, how will you get there? And research by Todd Rogers of Harvard Kennedy School has shown you can increase voter turnout. I've done work showing the same types of prompts can be helpful in getting people to go get a flu shot. And so we have a lot of evidence that it's a really simple tool for combating forgetting when you can't employ a digital timely reminder.
Yeah, that election and flu shot example, I mean, you could see that being applied to blood donations or volunteering activity and stuff like that, where I think people always have that good intention, but the frequency of it is not necessarily as regular as we'd like. So it's quite easy to kind of fall out of your consideration set of, or your kind of to-do list for the week. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we were very lucky to talk yesterday with Wendy Woods about habits. And I know you know Wendy's work quite well. So we're now supposed to be experts in building habits, and we hope our audience is too. But you also mentioned habits as a solution to change with a highlight on what you call elastic habits. Could you elaborate a little bit on this concept for us, Katie, about elastic habits?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you got to hear from Wendy. She is fabulous. And I've learned so much from her work on habits. I think one of the more interesting findings from my career, and I will say surprising findings, was actually about the importance of building habits that aren't quite as routine as you might think would be desirable. So I ran an experiment, and this was joint work with John Bashirs of Harvard Business School and a couple of other scholars, where we partnered with Google and randomly assigned 2,500 of their employees to different experimental conditions where we were trying to help them build lasting exercise habits. And we did this around the start of the new year. Everybody was enrolled in a month-long program that would essentially coach them up into hopefully a lasting habit of visiting their gym on campus. Google has really lovely gym facilities on its campuses. And we tried a couple of different approaches to encouraging habit formation. One of the approaches was to reward people for visiting the gym at a consistent time. So everyone in the program told us the date, not the date, just the time each day when they found it most useful to exercise, the sort of magic window for them. So maybe it's 5 to 7 right after work. Maybe it's 7 to 9 right before work. Different people chose different times. But then some people were rewarded for exercise only if they made it to the gym during that ideal window. And others were rewarded for exercise no matter when it happened. And this went on for about a month. And the idea here was to create differentiation in our two groups in terms of how regularly exercise was happening. Now, everyone in two different groups ended up going to the gym at basically the same frequency, but some people were making about 90% of their gym visits in the same window each day. And the other group, because they were rewarded for going to the gym anytime, ended up only visiting during that magic window about 50% of the time. So we basically end up with two populations who have similar frequency as they're trying to build a habit of engagement in this behavior, but really different patterns. One is all over the place in terms of when they're doing it, and the other is really consistent. And the big question for us was, okay, we're going to take away the program ends, we leave people to their own devices. Who's formed a more lasting habit? Who will go to the gym more frequently? And what I will say really surprised us, because it was not consistent with the theory we had going into this project, is that the group that did better was the group that had less consistency in when they exercised. The group that, instead of making their gym visits 90% of the time at the same time of day, made them in a more variable pattern. Only about half their gym visits were at the same time. So we're a little perplexed because we had expected, routine, consistency. This is the foundation of habit. Why is this happening? So we dug into the data, and what we found is, first of all, we weren't crazy. So the people who had been really trained and routinized into going at the same time of day, they actually were a bit more likely to continue visiting the gym at that same time. But here's the twist. If those folks missed their regular workout, say it was a 7 a.m. slot, that was it. They didn't come back to the gym. There was no other hope for them. It was that time or bust. The other group, however, they visited the gym a little less frequently in their magic window, But if they missed that window of opportunity, they were quite likely to come to the gym at some other time later in the day. So what we ended up seeing is that one group had formed really rigid routines and the other had formed much more elastic habits. And those elastic habits are more resilient to the fact that sometimes life gets in the way. You hit a traffic jam on the way to drop your kid at school and you can't get your workout in before work. You're going to have to find a backup plan. And the people who practiced finding a backup plan, who sometimes went to the gym in their ideal window, but also sometimes went at other times, they had learned to be elastic and to roll with the punches. And so that proved more effective overall for spurring change. I think it's a really important lesson that when we're trying to develop new habits, not only is it important to think about what's the ideal time and place to do it and sort of schedule reminders, but also to try to build in a bit of variability and practice finding other times, backup times, having a fallback plan so that when life gets in the way, you'll still find ways to get it done, whether it's meditation, whether it's exercise, whether it's practicing a new language on Duolingo, whatever it is, having that fallback plan can be so powerful.
Yeah, I think it's something we'll have to keep ourselves quite adherent to as well, because it's on the practitioner side, it's almost easier to define a very tightly specific habit routine that you want someone to adopt because you kind of feel like you've covered all bases. But like you say, building in that opportunity for variability, I think makes us stretch how we have to think a bit as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And for what it's worth, one thing that helped me think about why this matters is actually reflecting on my own experience as a serious competitive athlete and thinking about the way we practice when we're trying to build a skill in that context. So I played tennis very seriously as a kid and through college. And the way you practice to be really good is not sort of standing in one place, hitting the ball in the exact right format every time. You practice hitting off balance. You practice running all around. And I think if we apply that mindset to what we need to achieve when it comes to habits and when it comes to work, we'll recognize that sort of setting yourself up for the perfect shot and always practicing in that way is not going to create a resilience that you need to succeed in the world.
Makes sense. So far, we focused a lot on kind of individual change in our conversation, Katie, but we'd love for you to have your perspective about helping organizations steer people towards positive change. Do you have any recommendations to help leaders or managers instill positive changes like diversity and inclusion or cooperation or maybe innovation within an organizational framework?
Oh my goodness. Yes, there are so many things that good leaders can do to create the right situation to facilitate change. It's actually a little bit hard to pick where to go with this, but let me tell you about, I think, one of the most important things that a leader can do to encourage change, which is trying to use some of the lessons of influence. And here I want to nod to the great Bob Cialdini and his wonderful work there. And one of my favorite lessons has to do with the power of social norms and conveying to people that whatever behavior it is that an organization wants to encourage is a norm, or it's a growing norm. So there's some research showing even if the majority of people aren't yet doing it, if I tell you the numbers are up, they're on the rise, that's really attractive. We are really, really attuned to what other people are up to. And when we hear others are on board with a new behavior, whether it's recycling or, submitting your receipts on time. Yes, whatever it is you need, mentoring, pick the behavior that you want to encourage to the extent that it is a norm or that it's growing excitement and people are doing it more and more. Communicating that can be an incredibly powerful way to get a workforce or an organization more on board. Of course, you have to figure out, how do I create that kind of momentum in the first place? And there are other tools for that. But to the extent that you have a bit of momentum, highlighting that, emphasizing that to people is really powerful because everybody wants to join the bandwagon. No one wants to be left out. And it's a simple tool that I think is overlooked for creating momentum towards change.
Great. As usual, I have a closing question that I seem to be asking everyone before I pass back to Eric. So I've asked this, Katie, of Cass Suncy and of John List as well, with Olivier Sibony. So with our audience in mind, many of whom are passionate about behavioral science and nudging, but they're working in a corporate or commercial organization or maybe a government where they may not yet have a specific budget or a team for applying behavioral science. So all the interest, all the good intention, but not necessarily all the expertise yet or the budget. How would you encourage someone in an organization to make those early first moves or kind of put a first foot into incorporating behavioral science into their work?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I guess one of the things I would say is that to the extent they're attending events like this, learning about these tools, they're already well ahead of the game. But to the extent that it's possible to try even a simple A/B test to see the power of this approach, I think that's a great place to start. And often the easiest things to A/B test are communications, because making a small change in something like an email that you're sending out or a newsletter or, it's very low cost, and you can often see really big returns quickly if you build in some good behavioral science tools. And that often helps build the case for using these tools in more consequential, higher cost settings. So I think a great place to start is a little A/B testing in communications, just to show how well this works. And for what it's worth, when the social and behavioral sciences team started up at the White House, almost a decade ago now, under the amazing leadership of Maya Shankar, one of the key ways she thinks they got a foothold or a toehold, whatever you want to call it, was through building the case through some very light touch A/B tests, showing just how cost effective these tools can be, and moving from there. So that's my tip.
Thanks a lot for your time. It's great to get another opportunity to learn from your experience and to learn your great insight. So maybe one final question before we start our first session for our day 2. What would be your one piece of advice to build on Ted's question to help leaders to start implementing behavioral science in their organization?
Well, this is a self-serving answer, I suppose, but as an educator, I think one really exciting thing right now is how much great science communication is happening, how many opportunities there are to learn, whether it's from podcasts, newsletters, books, webinars, easily accessible information about this burgeoning science and how it can be applied. They're everywhere. And so I guess another piece of advice I have is start digesting that content. Sign up for as many newsletters about behavioral science as you can. Start listening to the great podcasts like Hidden Brain and Freakonomics. And I'll tout my own Choiceology as well. And pick up the books that Eric is constantly recommending on behavioral science, and you will start to see it everywhere, see the opportunities everywhere. So learning is a big, big opportunity. And I think it's so exciting that there's so many resources out there, and I hope people will take advantage.
Yes, I think it is a great advice. Thanks a lot again, Kathy.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely.
Great. And for our attendees, stay where you are. We're headed into the first session of day 2, where we will discuss the topic of customer experience, and we will see you there.
Voilà, nous espérons que vous avez aimé cette première intervention avec Katie Milkman.